we discussed the economic survey yesterday, and the survey had suggested that agriculture, productivity, creation of public goods, trust-based governance, and private sector participation are the four pillars of economic progress. Today, the finance minister has presented the budget, and there's been a lot of discussion already during the day in terms of looking at the numbers and looking at the possible plan the government has. Finance minister has also stated that we are building a technology-driven, knowledge-based economy with strong public finance. So, one question which we want to address in our conversation today uh, is the resource mobilization and allocation strategy of the Government of India, consistent with the economic strategy which has been laid out by the Economic Survey and the Finance Minister in the morning, and also what kind of trade-offs are involved in driving growth with macroeconomic stability. That's the key question we will try addressing in our conversation today. The finance minister also highlighted that the budget will provide strong impetus to growth and job creation. And she qualified saying with microeconomic stability, as I mentioned earlier. Right? So let's see if resource allocation and mobilization choices support our growth strategy. The first question which we ask is the budget raising the required amount of resources? And which in a way determines the role we expect the government to play. Since we're recovering from the pandemic and earlier slow growth during 2019, we obviously expect the government to continue playing an important role. Right. So, which means to play this role, government should have sufficient resources with itself. During the coming year, we expect the revenue receipts to grow by about 12.1%, which is faster than the GDP, which means we're expecting revenue buoyancy to continue. And the government borrowings are expected to remain at the same level, which is 17.8 lakh crores. They're marginally up from 17.6 lakh crores. So as a result, we are expecting the government spending to go up only by 7.5%. Right. So our GDP is expected to grow by 10.5%, and government resource mobilization and therefore spending is expected to grow only by 7.5%, which implies that government is expecting to make a much smaller contribution to economic growth in the coming year. Uh, while this strategy is helpful in bringing macroeconomic stability, the trade-off is low growth. Right? Specifically, government is expecting the tax revenue to go up in line with GDP, uh, with custom and GST growing faster than direct taxes. So, which means that you would also leave slightly lower resources in the hands of private sector, because if tax to GDP ratio is going up, then obviously it means private sector will have slightly smaller resources. But one thing marginally raising capability of the central government to contribute is the government envisages a lower share of states in the tax revenue. Right. So to that extent, the central government will have slightly higher resources with itself. But that naturally means that the states will have a smaller share in total revenue. Right. So which means that we are expecting a relatively lower contribution from the central government and even the state governments to that extent. Coming to expenditure, the government has wisely and uh, uh, confidently shifted focus to capital expenditure, which now expected to grow by 37.4% during the coming year, having grown by 22.8% during the current year. Right? Capex to GDP ratio is now over 3%, the level we've not seen for many years. Like India, we've been sacrificing our capital expenditure for just maintaining the size of the government, but this is been changing. This is now changing for last 2 years. But we still have some serious catch up to do. because we did have our capital expenditure in excess of 3% during the 90s and early 2000. In fact, it was 2.4% without railways during 2008, and it's expected to reach that level in the coming year. It's expected to be 2.5%. So, in some sense, we've now completed the catch up. We are going to be at 2.5% against 2.4% in 2008. Right. And the challenge for India has always been saying three ministries, which is food, defense, and railways, they take away two-thirds of the capex. Right. All these three are essential infrastructure or security related expenditure. So really can't make much compromise there. While the government is allocating greater sums to roads and railway, the defense capex has not been going up much. Defense capex last year also it's grown up. This year it's expected to grow by 8.5%, and next year also it's expected to grow by 8.5%, which barely covers inflation adjusted or inflation related increases. Right. So one of the expectation in the survey yesterday and even in in the minister's speech today has been that we are expecting a higher participation from the private sector. But given the allocation we are seeing in roads particularly, and the same thing is with railways, uh, our assessment is that private sector is not able to or is not willing to invest in roads and railways. So therefore, government is having to do the heavy lifting, which means that other areas will naturally get a slower or a lower capex or government expenditure in capital for capital projects, right? And we've seen that happen this year or in the coming year. We've seen that happen because government allocation to urban infrastructure is not expected to go up as much as it has been gone up in the last. Urban rejuvenation program, metro projects are not getting larger share this time. Right. So there is a trade-off whether we can invest in roads or we can invest in urban infrastructure. So my sense is that since government is talking about municipal reforms, it's expecting that some of the local government organizations will pick up the slack. Let's see how far that comes true. Right. And now, given the focus on fiscal consolidation, revenue expenditure is also not expected to go up. Actually, it's just expected to go up by 1.2% next year against 8.1% this year. So, which means adjusted for inflation, we're likely to experience a negative growth. But that's only partly true because expected reduction in revenue growth is expected to come from lower food and fertilizer subsidy. As far as food subsidies are concerned, government is assuming that we don't need food subsidy. The 80 crore people who were benefiting from food subsidies are not going to need them now because yesterday, remember, our CA mentioned saying recovery is now complete. So, which may or may not be true. So, we'll have to just figure out saying what happens to rural consumption as a result of lowering the food subsidies. Fertilizer subsidies are expected to come down because we're expecting oil prices to be benign this in the coming year. So we should expect some lower fertilizer subsidy. So to me, it really means that the budget is leaving the primary responsibility for growth to private sector, as survey was hinting yesterday. But we would therefore need to ask ourselves, is the private sector, which is households as well as the businesses, are in a position to do heavy lifting, right? That is, do we have sufficient earnings growth and sufficient capital, which is savings, which can finance an equity and debt to drive growth in consumption as well as investment. As I was mentioning yesterday, my assessment is that we probably going to struggle with that. We're not going to be in a position to drive growth through private sector as much as we expect them to do. Though one big announcement today and big change today, which came in, is that the government is putting additional money in household pockets. which is through lowering of direct taxes, both for middle income families as well as the high income families. High income families largely because reduction in surcharge, lower income families or middle income families as a result of shifting of the exemption limits or shifting of the slabs. So that is a positive, and hopefully that will provide impetus to private consumption as well as investment. Finally, let's look at some of the new initiatives the government has announced. One was PM Vikas, and the other one is PM PVTG. While these are important initiatives, the allocation for these initiatives either is too small. PM Vikas is getting, I think, just about 540 crores, or it is consolidation of existing schemes. Consequently, we have to see when will these initiatives start producing results in terms of either driving growth or at least building resilience or ability to grow in these families, which are marginalized families in most cases. Right. Another important part which I noticed in the budget was that the 30,000 crore support has been capital support is being provided to the oil marketing company, which I guess is required as a result of government holding back or the companies holding back increase in petrol and diesel prices. So that 30,000 crore has been provided for this year. There's no provision during the or next year. There's no provision in the current year for this capital. So which means this capital support will come only in the next year, though the cost has been incurred this year. In summary, my assessment, the government seems to trade off stability for growth during the coming year. And let's hope the private sector is able to pick up the slack and the financial system can support growth by providing the required risk capital to business or consumption credit to households. That's what my take is, and look forward to your comments. Thank you.